Hello everyone, this is Mr. Reimer. This video is for World History class on Monday, September 28th and Tuesday, September 29th. It's entitled Early Trade Routes. It's the first lesson of Unit 2, Classical Civilizations. And this lesson, our objective is students will explain the diffusion of the major ideas in mathematics, science, and technology that originated in the River Valley civilizations by providing a written response to a question. So in this lesson, I want to zoom away from our River Valley civilizations, which we are studying, and I want to explore how those ideas that they created, how they spread. That's what that word diffusion means, to spread. All right, before we do all that, let's begin with a preview. The idea of civilizations, that complex organization of human society, it spread too, much like agriculture had spread. And so by 2000 BC, we start to see new civilizations outside of that those original areas, mostly because they were connected to trade routes, and so they learned of the technology and the organization of these earlier civilizations. One of those groups is called the Minoans. They dominated sea trade from about 2700 BCE to 1400 BC, so over 1,000 years. And we were going to listen to a cover of a song you might know by Radiohead called Creep, except it's going to be about the ancient Minoan civilization. So I want you to pause the video, listen to the lyrics and the song on YouTube, and note characteristics of the Minoan civilization. What about it makes it a civilization? Pause the video now. All right. Hopefully we had a great discussion about the Minoan civilization in the chat. Now I want to get to the first of two get-sig charts we're going to make today. So there are two main ways that those ideas of science, mathematics diffused. All right. They either diffused by land or they diffused by sea. And so let's begin with talking about pastoral nomads. They are on the fringes of civilization. So if you can see my cursor, they're in this grassland steppe region of Eurasia, just north of ancient China, just north of the Middle East, and most of what is today Russia. They're also in the grassland south of the Sahara, here in Africa. And what characterizes that civilization is their domestication of animals, but only animals. All right, and so they would be animals, from nearby, much in the same way that the early agricultural peoples domesticated plants that were nearby. And so what these pastoral nomads did, or how they got their name pastoral nomads, is they would migrate on a regular basis, following routes. They would take their animals to new pastures, to new watering places. So speaking of what kind of animals, a variety: sheep, horses, reindeer to the north in Eurasia, camels in the Middle East and in Africa, and then cattle, especially in Africa. Because they moved around a lot, they did not manufacture goods. You did not see classes of artisans in nomadic groups like you did in civilizations. But they had a lot of interactions with civilizations, all right, in a number of ways. One of the key interactions is that they would trade. So they had horses that the Chinese army depended on for war. And so they would trade their horses for many of the manufactured goods from China, most notably silk, as well as weapons. Now, these animals were central to nomadic culture. You can see this in this poem from the Aryans: rushing to glory, to the capture of herds, swooping down as a hungry falcon, eager to be first, he darts amid the ranks of the chariots, happy as a bridegroom making a garland. So they are what we call an honor culture. They valued protecting their honor, and so to do that required quite a bit of courage in battle, especially, but also courage in the hunt. And they lived a very, tough life. Life on the road, no roads really, but on their routes. And so they valued being hospitable to others, other clans, the people from the civilizations, even though they were considered barbarians. All right, that name comes from the Greeks, who thought their language just sounded like bar, 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 bar. And so they came to be called barbarians, which is a derogative, negatory term we use today. But in fact, they had a culture and a complex society. Just was different than the farmers and the people living in civilizations. All right. I mentioned they lived in clans. All right. These clans were ruled by male chiefs, though sometimes these clans would form larger organizations and then would show up in the historical record. You see, for example, the Hittites out of what is today Turkey, forming an empire in Southwest Asia and even conquering Egypt. We talked about the Aryans when we talked about the Indus River Valley, these Indo-European speaking peoples who invaded and migrated into India. And what these pastoral nomads were really good at was adopting and spreading technology. You see an example of a chariot here, right? So the wheel, which we learned was invented by the Sumerians, the pastoral nomads, the Hittites, they adopted that technology of the wheel, combined it with the Paleolithic technology of a bow and arrow to make a mounted rider, right? So you had one person driving the chariot, right, using the reins on the horse, and the other person firing arrows. It was deadly weapon that enabled the Hittites to conquer and create a large empire. All right, I mentioned living in clans. Now a little bit more about these clans. They are male dominated, but compared to the civilizations, say, of Sumer, relative gender equality. Think more of like Paleolithic times when everyone was responsible in some way for the survival of the group and for for food. Polygamy is common, so that's one husband, many wives, most likely as a result of the high death rates that they would experience, primarily in battle. So think of it like a social safety net. So if a woman lost her husband and there weren't a lot of men around, we're talking about small groups, 30 to 150, as a way for survival, she would then remarry a man who had already had a wife. Now you see an example of modern day pastoral groups from northern Eurasia there in that picture. All right, so that's what I want to say about pastoral nomads. Hopefully you filled in your Get Sig charts. If you didn't quite put the information in the right spot, we're going to go over that again next time. But I want to pause here, and I want to have you compare in 1 to 3 sentences these nomadic peoples we were just speaking about with the Neolithic farmers from earlier. Focus on one similarity and one difference. And I gave you some sample sentences there. So pause the video. Review your notes. I'll see you in the chat, and then we'll move on. All right, welcome back. So again, this lesson is entitled Early Trade Routes. Our objective is to explain the diffusion, the spread, of the major ideas in mathematics, science, and technology that originated in the River Valley civilizations by providing a written response to a question. So earlier we made a Get Sick chart about pastoral nomads, a land-based people. Now we're going to make a Get Sick chart about sea peoples. We're going to focus on the Phoenicians. All right, so before we get into some key information, here is how Herodotus, the father of history, described the Phoenicians in the first century BC. I'm sorry, he wasn't living in the first century, but they were, at their height in the first century BC. He said this: the Phoenicians, who had formerly dwelt on the shores of the Euphratean Sea, what we call the Persian Gulf today, having migrated to the Mediterranean and settled in the parts which they now inhabit, began at once, they say, to adventure on long voyages, freighting their vessels with the wares, means the goods, of Egypt and Assyria in Mesopotamia. They landed at many places on the coast, and among the rest at Argos, which was then preeminent above all the states included now under the common name of Hellas, or Greece. Here they exposed their merchandise and traded with the natives. So what do we learn from Herodotus about the Phoenicians? We know where they were from the eastern Mediterranean, having migrated there. They went on long voyages, and they traded. All right, so let's look at these trade routes on the map. You see here in the eastern Mediterranean, right, their port cities, Tyre, Aratus. All right, and from there, they went on these long sea voyages throughout the Mediterranean, charting new routes as far away as the Atlantic Ocean and in England. Right? and their civilization was based on sea trade, right? And along these voyages, they would create new colonies, most notably Carthage, which was a powerful colony into the Roman times, which we'll talk about then. All right. So, what kind of things were they making? Were they trading? One example is you see here an amphoriscos from the 5th century. It's made, and this is I thought was really interesting, mix of sand and animal dung, poop, and then shaped into the mixture in the form of a jug. So it's an example of pottery. Right? And so they would then dip the jug into melted glass and then apply decorations, these long strings of colored glass, and store things such as perfumed oil, perhaps olive oil or wine. All right, just one of many of the manufactured goods that the Phoenicians would trade, in addition to picking up the goods of other places and then taking them on to even more places and trading that way. Also notably from the Phoenicians is their creation of an alphabet. And the reason it's notable is that they're the first ones to develop an alphabet based on a character and a sound, right? And so it dramatically reduces the amount of characters in the alphabet. They had 22. Our modern English alphabet has 26. Our modern English alphabet is descended from the Phoenician alphabet, which influenced the Greek alphabet and the Roman alphabet and then the English alphabet, right? Now, they wrote right to left, all right? It was a Semitic language. But I can't stress enough how key to education and to democracy, really, that creating the alphabet was. Because before, it took a highly specialized scribe many years to master the written language. And so writing was a privilege, and it was a way to oppress people, keep them in the dark, because very few people could write. It just took a lot of time and energy and money. So, but with the invention of a simplistic alphabet, sound to letter, right, it led to more and more people being able to read and write and be able to govern themselves eventually. All right. We're not going to talk too much about the Phoenicians. Let's get now to our process. It's a two-part question, a simple question and then a complex question. Which parts of the world were excluded from the early trade networks? So we were talking about areas connected to the trade routes. I want you to think about which were not connected and how might their exclusion have affected the development of these areas. Now, in this unit, we're going to start to learn about how to write a thesis statement. Right? And here's your first introduction. A thesis statement is your opinion, your argument in answer to a question. I've asked you a question, right? There's no right answer. There's no, you can't go look this up in a book. I want to know what you think. I want you to make an argument about how the exclusion from these trade networks might have affected the development of these areas. So how do you go about answering questions like this? Well, first, you just need to write down all your ideas from their notes about how they might have been affected, and use the themes, right? Maybe you make a get-sig chart of all the different ways it might have been affected. Okay, and then from this big list of notes, you can pull out some commonalities or some similarities that can then become your main ideas, right? Because in a thesis, you want to focus on 1 to 3 main points. Here, I've asked you for 2. Right? So the parts of the world that were excluded from the early trade networks were, and to help you with that, I've given you another map. In orange, that's agriculture before 5000 BCE. In purple, agriculture after 5000 BCE up to 2000 BCE. And then, in the second part, their exclusion affected the development of these areas by blank and blank. And here you might really want to focus on the themes, right? And the areas by something related to geography, something related to technology. All right. I'll be there in class to help you in the chat. Good luck. I'll see you next time.